My name is Megan Mann, and I am the livestock agent in Lake County, Florida. And I am also a member of the Central Florida Livestock Agents Group. Ordinarily, my colleagues and I work to bring programming to our producers in person, but we are under a temporary pause right now because of COVID-19. So we have been working hard to bring our programming to folks in a new way, mostly online, so that people can enjoy our classes and take part in our education wherever they're at. Part of our university system is that our county agents work hand in hand with our state specialists at the University of Florida. And in ordinary circumstances, I might invite our specialist to come and be a guest speaker at one of our programs, but these are not ordinary circumstances. So instead, I have invited one of our state specialists today to participate in a Q&A. I have with me today Dr. Chad Carr. He is an associate professor with the University of Florida's Department of Animal Science, and he is also the state extension meat specialist, which sounds like the most delicious job title I have ever heard. So can you tell us a little bit about what a state extension meat specialist does, other than get to eat steak all day?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, sure. Oh, I do several different things, but the main thing is I work with awesome people like yourself throughout the state that are involved in the extension service and work with some awesome students. So my wife and I, Kathy, we moved here to Florida in the summer of 2007, and my job is an extension specialist. We work to help our small meat processors that we have throughout the state in terms of food safety. We help them try to add value to what they do. We got a huge, prior to the COVID-19, Florida has a huge food service industry, and so we've helped a lot of the facilitators within the food service business, those folks which are purveyors, the Cisco's, the Buckhead Beefs, the U.S. Foods of the world. There's a lot of folks that work in those kind of facilities that sell meat. You know, at the start of the month, they're selling Volkswagens, and by the end of the month, they're peddling chuck rolls, and they don't really know much about what that is, and so we help those folks some. And then I do a lot of stuff with youth programming as well. That's what I do with extension. And on campus, I teach a lot. I teach a class called The Meat We Eat. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of a snapshot of the U.S. livestock and meat business, kind of how it compares a little bit to what's in the rest of the world. And it's a consumer-based class. I teach some evaluation classes and do several different things, but work with awesome people. And working at the University of Florida is a lot of fun. So very thankful for what I do, work with good folks. So,
and we are thankful to have you on board. I know when I was a broke grad student in the Department of Animal Science, I was thankful for you because I got to enjoy some bites of steak as a guinea pig for some of the taste trials. So they do some palatability things, and
right. Yeah, we try to build a better beef steak.
That's right. Yeah. And I enjoyed helping with that process. So kept me some lunches sometimes. So we brought Dr. Carr here because he is an expert on all things meat, and some of my colleagues and I have been getting calls. There's an increased interest in local food and people wanting to support local farmers, especially as we've seen some of those supply chains struggle as restaurants have closed down, and I can certainly appreciate that. My husband's a chef, so I know firsthand what has happened to that industry. And a lot of the folks who were growing for those industries and lost their buyers, and the community has responded by wanting to help support those farmers. And so we started to get calls from folks who want to purchase beef or purchase locally raised meat, and also from folks who want to meet that need. And we thought this is a great opportunity for Dr. Carr to come and answer some of these questions directly from the source, so get it from the expert. But first, you know, we hear about Florida, we talk about it as being a cow-calf state, which means that most of our beef cattle producers are raising calves that are sent out west to grow. And can you speak a little bit about why we have some, you know, we typically send calves out west rather than finish a lot of them in Florida, although we do have some smaller finishers here?
Sure, that's right. Well, I'll quote my buddy Dr. Todd Thrift here just a little bit, and he always makes this statement: if you've got 20 cows and you sell 18 calves a year, that's a hobby largely, right?
Sure.
But if we have a 50,000 head feed yard, that's not a hobby. That's a business.
Mm-hmm.
And so the U.S. grain-based beef finishing industry is pretty recent, really. I mean, it really started there in the High Plains area in the 60s. And so we went from, in essentially 2 generations' time, where most of the meat industry in this country was most of the livestock business was reasonably extensive, and the plants were in Chicago. The beef industry changed within a 25-year period of time, so that now we have this largely grain-based beef finishing industry, which was established in the High Plains of the U.S., and then those processing facilities, those large-scale commercial processing facilities, were established reasonably close to that. And so the cost of production is less than what it is here. Collectively, it is generally cheaper to ship the calves that we raise here in this state, some 900,000 calves or so, which are born in the state of Florida annually. It's generally cheaper for us to send those calves to the middle of the country for those subsequent stages of production. But then a decent bit of that product, depending upon where the packer is, some of that product would certainly come back to the Southeast, So, there is, that's kind of the model that has been established. And, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, there were more regional packers, not just nationwide, but here in Florida as well. But, businesses have changed and evolved some, and there has been some consolidation. There has. But largely it's been an element of scale and economics.
Yeah. Yep. It's a business like anything else. And there are still some packers, though, in Florida, and folks can get a list of those.
That's correct. That's right. We have a list of those. And just recently, Mr. Jim Hanley with Florida Cattlemen's Association, there's also a recent list that they have established from the folks within all of their county cattlemen's associations of not only processors, but then cow-calf producers and some that are finishing and selling some direct-to-consumer products as well.
That's right.
We can share that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll make the links available to any of the documents that you reference available in the comments to this as well. So we have some really good online documents that are available that list the different processors and their contact information. So if I have a couple of steers that I want to finish out myself, so I'm not interested in taking them to the market, I want to raise them to their finish weight, which is when they're ready to process. And I want to sell them to some neighbors. I've got neighbors who are interested. What are my options for doing that legally?
Probably for somebody, and I think probably that threshold number would probably be about 30,
Okay.
Somebody, if you want to, and kind of the slang term for that is freezer beef. So let's say that I have 20 cows and I'm going to take 5 of my calves that are spring born, and I am going to myself try to merchandise quarters of beef or halves of beef that would ultimately be cut and wrapped and packaged at some custom processor. That slang term would be freezer beef. And we can merchandise that on the internet. But the key thing with something like that, there would be a processor who would provide a service for us. Okay. And so that would be a custom exempt processor. They would get at least some biannual inspection from FSIS. But the caveat with all that is that they're providing a service for me or whoever it is that's going to buy those quarters, halves, sides of beef, whatever it might be.
Okay.
And that is a custom exempt processor. That's not done under federal inspection. We cannot sell that meat legally at retail on a piece-by-piece basis. So that in that instance, they're providing a service for whoever is going to ultimately receive the product. And it's for me and my non-paying guest.
Okay.
So that would be the easiest thing to do.
So whoever owns that steer when it's on the hoof owns the meat on the other end.
That's correct.
So you would.
If I put something on the Facebook and said, hey, I want to merchandise, I have these in 16 months from now, these calves are going to be ready, and we'll offer quarters of beef. So for those 5 sides, or for those 5 cattle, ultimately we would merchandise, 20 quarters of beef, 16 months from now. We would have it listed down, and the processor would know this is who is ultimately going to get these. They will pay for the processing, and they'll come and pick the product up.
So more people would own that animal when it goes to the processor and they pick up the meat.
That's correct. That's correct. We have sold the animal. That's what we have done. And then the component pieces come back to whoever's going to get the animal.
Okay. And so they're still subject to regulations and some degree of inspection. It's just not the daily inspection that a USDA facility. So it's still safe and clean, and it's not being done in some back alley or.
No, that's correct. That's
Okay.
right. But that product cannot, it will, when you receive it, if you buy, at your county fair, let's say you buy a steer from a youngster at your county fair, and you and your neighbor go in on it, and you take it to X processor, and when you get your half back, and you can tell them, I want my half, I want whatever, however many, I want inch stick steaks, I want 80% lean ground beef, I want roast out of the chuck, whatever, however you want to do it. When you make those declarations, when you get those frozen packages back, it will say not for sale. That product cannot be legally resold.
Right. That is yours.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. And you're not just going to get 400 pounds of filet mignon, then you're going to get.
No, that's exactly right. So let's see, I just saw this today and I thought that it was good, so we can bring this up if I can get smart enough to share my screen here. Down here. Here we go. So some folks in extension at Minnesota, this is a new graphic that I seen. That's good, and it kind of documents if you buy a quarter of beef about what you're going to be getting. So if we have a 1,300 pound steer, that 1,300 pound steer is going to make somewhere, reasonably close to a 775, 800 pound carcass. But that carcass, you're not going to get 800 pounds of meat, right?
Right.
So from that, depending upon what you tell them, if you want bone-in cuts or boneless cuts, or depending upon how they will cut it, and how much fat you tell them about the ground beef, and what kind of trim level you have for the cuts that you have. But this is just rough, and this is a nice job that they have done here. So we have can you see this, Meg?
I can. I don't know if you can make it a little bigger on the screen, maybe.
I don't know if I can or not. Let's see what this.
Press the
edit.
magnifying glass, maybe, on top of the ing of preparing.
Ooh.
Aha.
Oh man.
Oh, okay. There you go. Oh, that's perfect. You can move up and down a little bit on that.
Yeah, there we go. So now if I can get to the zoomer, something else shows up about okay, here we go. So and this is talking about something about like a 1,300 pound steer. So its dressing percent, or what the carcass weight, it'll be 60 to 65%. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into that. But collectively, like we said, you're probably going to have around a 770 some odd pound, 800 pound carcass from a 1,300 pound steer. And if you buy a quarter, this is about what you would expect to get, somewhere in the neighborhood of 140, 150 pounds of retail ready product. That's what you should expect. So if you had the whole steer, then you're going to be talking somewhere about 50%-ish of the live weight of a fed steer, somewhere around not hardly, but about 50 some odd percent of the carcass weight approximately. So if you think, and we multiplied this 140 some odd times 4, we're going to be right around a little over 500 pounds. So that's about what you would have approximately from that 1,300 pound steer. And for this quarter, one thing that people don't think about very often when you think, oh, we're gonna buy a quarter or a side of beef, it takes a lot of freezer space to get that done. So this is an estimate here at about the size of chest freezer that you need. So 5 cubic foot chest freezer ish, or all 5.5 cubic foot upright freezer.
Okay.
And this was folks at Minnesota.
That's great. Yeah, if you can email me that picture, I'll make sure to include that as well in what we're going to send out with this, because that's real helpful. It's
I can do that.
Nice to have the visual with it. Yeah, that's great.
And then this, relative to cost, kind of thinking about what that's going to be. So depending upon what the processor's going to, probably somewhere, I don't know, reasonably close to maybe $100 slaughter fee, something like that. And then probably, the variation in terms of, most folks will charge you by hanging weight in terms of their cut and wrap fee, and that could vary some. But let's say if we had an 800 pound carcass, let's just throw in the value of 70 cents a pound, cut and wrap fee for that 70 cents a pound. What have you got? You got $100 slaughter fee, and then probably somewhere around 600 some odd dollars additional processing cost ish. That'd be for the entire beef animal. So something common like that.
So people can kind of work out, it's not just the cost of processing the animal, there's the cost of getting it processed
that's the process. Yeah. That's not talking anything about the cost of the animal. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What if I were somebody who had quite a few more cattle and I wanted to go into the retail business and sell not a half or a quarter, but wanted to sell individual cuts or ground beef? What would be my option? I couldn't go to the custom retail exempt.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So then that's a pretty big jump for someone when they make the jump from being a livestock producer to a meat marketer. That's a pretty big jump. It really is. But we have some EDIS documents that we have come up with that I think make reference to some of this.
They
do. I thought I had this brought up earlier, but I obviously flubbed the dub on that. I do have this.
We'll make sure to get them shared with all of this, because they do a good job of doing it out.
Kind of snapshot pictures of the or screen share pictures of some of that. If I can get this, get my ducks in a row and get back up here. But yeah, so this is kind of a screenshot from this this EDIS document, and kind of goes through and it asks some questions, and it talks about, if you, like we said, if you don't have very many to merchandise, probably just going with this concept of freezer beef or freezer pork. That's probably the best thing to do. But if you really want to be married to this thing, and you want to make the jump to go from being a livestock producer to a meat marketer, and you want to be able to sell meat on a piece-by-piece basis, this kind of goes through that.
Okay.
And So, yeah, those animals, they have to be slaughtered under federal inspection at the very bare minimum. And in most instances, if you don't have somebody that's going to parcel and piece the carcasses, unless you have a butcher shop, let's say, if that was the case, that'd be a little bit different. But if you got cows and we're going to feed these calves and we're going to sell 18-month-old, 20-month-old fed steers, and you want to sell meat and you want to take it to the farmer's market, I would suggest you to find a federally inspected processor who would be willing to do this and be willing to, you'll have to go through and get your label, but they will ultimately, you'd have to say, hey, we want individually priced stuff, and they're going to have their inspection legend on that product. And once you do that and you get that product, then there's some local things that you need to do. And I think some of these subsequent slides here hit on a little bit of this. But with that, you have to sell product at a farmer's market, for instance. You have to have a mobile vendor's permit. You have to have a food handler's permit. And then you have to, there's one other step there. I should go and look at the document myself. But that's what they want. They want to sell this product at the farmer's market. And you can. It must be federally inspected under slaughter. It needs to be cut into pieces under federal inspection. And then some of those local requirements, like with relative to FDACs, would be the mobile vendor's permit and whatever to be a meat merchandiser. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure if I can find that document, I'll bring it up. And we'll go from there. Let's see.
And the spirit behind all of this is not to add layers of regulation. It's for food safety.
That's correct. That's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. There's with what's going on right now, there's a lot of push with folks that, there's some burdensomeness associated with some of the regulations. But if the livestock industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's no way to really, what goes on at a small FSIS inspected slaughter facility, they get the same stamp of inspection as a facility that is exporting whatever, right? Now there's going to, depending upon where we're exporting that product, there's going to be different thresholds of export regulation that they have to hit. But the core component of food safety is exactly the same, right? And there's, right now you'll see lots of stuff on Facebook and folks are talking about product that we import. I'll guarantee you that meat that we import into this country, it's not going to be part and parcel and we say we're going to take meat from this country. No, it's by plant. And it'll be reviewed and in-plant audit by USDA FSIS to say, can they do this equal to what we do in this country in terms of, phytochemical food safety regulations. So.
And that was one of the questions that we had from one of our when we advertised this Q&A was meat coming from other countries as safe as meat that was grown in the United States? So it sounds like it's not just full sale coming from another country; it's coming from a plant in another country which meets the requirements.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Very good.
This document here, is this being shared now, Meg?
It is, yes, sir. Here we go.
It is, how do I legally sell meat for my own livestock and poultry? Pretty creative.
Answers the question.
Yeah, that's right. So this goes through, let's see. what state or local requirements are needed for me to operate retail exemption, and it goes through that. So you have to have, if you have meat that has been individually packaged, labeled, has an FSIS inspection legend on it, priced individually, and you want to sell this at a farmer's market, for instance, that's where, or you want to sell it, you would have to be established as a retail establishment at your house or whatever. These are the specs. So somebody has to be trained as a food manager. You can click on this. The facility must meet minimum construction and sanitation standards. Most of that means 3-part sink, that kind of stuff. And then you have to have the proper food permit. So several different things, but it can be done. It darn sure can be done, and there are people that are doing it.
We've got some folks in Lake County who are doing it successfully. So
that's right.
It can be done.
And I want to find, I should have brought Mr. Hanley's email up about folks that
that's the list of Florida cattlemen selling directly.
Yes.
I can share that list in the links when we share the video.
Okay. Okay. So I can bring that up, and there's probably some more folks to add to this, but there's that, I think.
A couple of the other questions we had, someone had a question about advertising meat, if there were limits about any limits on advertising. I guess that would have to do with health claims they could make, maybe, or
well, there are on the label. There are there's limits as to what you can have on the label. What you put on Facebook, no, there's not really. There's not. But yeah, for what goes on the label, there's limitations.
So what are the requirements for on the label? What has to be?
So if you want to make a statement that this is grass-fed beef, for instance, you would, when you turn in your label to FSIS, and whoever's going to slaughter and package the process, whatever their inspection legend is going to be on there, if that goes on the label, then you would have to have a signed affidavit as to what you're doing.
Okay.
That's what that would be. For FSIS labeling, that wouldn't necessarily require a third-party audit of your facility. Now, if you are trying to merchandise meat as being USDA organic,
there's a whole lot of requirements.
A whole other deal, right? That does require third-party auditing. But there are several of those label claims. That's at one time, the USDA Ag Marketing Service had kind of delved into this marketing claim stuff, but they kind of backed out of that. And the only entity which deals with labels and labeling claims is USDA, or with anything with meat, is USDA Food Safety Inspection Service. Very good. So, something like we always talk about in livestock meat evaluation, like Publix with their green wise, like that's not a process verified program. That's something that they have turned in. That's a marketing deal. Yeah.
I always tell people some labels are meant to tell you something, and some labels are meant to sell you something. So there's a difference. So one of the questions we had was about age and weight of cattle. So I guess that has to do with when they're finished, because there is a time when cattle have laid down the right amount of fat, and that's when we talk about them being finished, so that they've done putting on muscle and they've laid down the correct amount of fat, and they're ready to be processed. So they were asking what age and or weight do they typically bring the best price?
to sell steaks and roast out of them and to have really highly palatable stuff. To sell steaks, yeah, you probably would like to have an animal that has some external fat on them, right? That's going to help the shape of the cuts. If they deposit some fat externally, they potentially deposit some fat within the muscle. That's what you're going to taste. But if we're grinding it all, the greatest demand right now is going to be for ground product, right? I mean, we have had, since the start of the pandemic, demand for ground beef has went through the roof.
Sure.
That grinder, it's a pretty good equalizer, right? It's you can take something that's going to be super tender, we grind it, it's going to be super tender, or it can be pretty tough, and we grind it, and it's going to be pretty tender, right? So, but yeah, if you want to sell steaks and roast, you probably need to have something that's been, depending upon what you want to do, but yeah, the age of the animal works against you relative to tenderness. And if you are wanting to merchandise a product that's been supplemented with some feed, it will darn sure help the amount of fat that's deposited externally within the muscle and fat's flavor. And so, but demand for ground beef is really strong.
And that was one of the questions we had too. Someone asked if there was an age that was too old, and there's not, but retired dairy cows don't bring, they're not going to be your most tender cuts of meat, but it's certainly edible. It's just not going to be.
Oh yeah. Make awesome ground beef.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and as a livestock agent,
that dairy cow that's been on a real high plane of nutrition, most of the time, most of the cuts that she would generate would taste pretty good, and that's largely a function of being on a decent bit of concentrating and having pretty white fat. But if she's got some on her, yeah, those cuts could be pretty chewy.
Sure. And so the time at which your animal is ready for processing depends on the breed composition and then also what you're trying to produce. So if you're trying to produce high value, high grading steak, or are you trying to produce a high yielding animal? That's
yes, ma'am.
So, yep. And then another question that we had is restrictions on vaccinations and medications prior to processing. So we call that withdrawal time. If you want to touch on that, and how do we know?
Yeah.
That?
How do we know what now?
How do we know folks are observing withdrawal time?
Well, if an animal is slaughtered under federal inspection, there will be a percentage of the day's slaughter in which the kidneys will be assessed, and they will potentially do a residue test. And so, if by chance, if an animal hasn't adhered to that proper withdrawal time, and let's say, for instance, that we had a dairy cow that had.
Not to interrupt you, but if you could define withdrawal time for folks who don't know what I was talking about, what does that mean?
So that withdrawal time, that is the amount of time that it takes for any compound that we would have given to an animal to have withdrawn from the tissue sufficient so that the FDA states that it has been safe to consume that product.
So it could be generally a warmer or an antibiotic or.
Correct. Right. Yeah. Whatever the compound is, any kind of drug would have an adhered to or a tested withdrawal time. Mm-hmm. And that would say right there on the label, whatever that would be. So, and it would say, like, if you give X compound, this animal has its slaughter is prohibited for the next 7 days, or the slaughter or withdrawal time is 14 days. And so that would be established to ensure consumer safety. Yeah, so that's exactly what that would be. So if you as a producer, if there was an animal that had became sick and you gave an antibiotic, or if you would give them some amphonetic to work against parasite infestation or whatever. You should look on that bottle, and it will say what the proper withdrawal time is prior to slaughter, and darn sure adhere to that. Mm-hmm. And then it's one of those things that honestly in large-scale commercial processing, we don't hardly have any mess-ups at all, honestly. Where it's a problem would be somebody that we have a cull animal that's going to processing, and we just, it just kind of slipped up on us. That's essentially where. But in a large-scale commercial feeding operation or bears and gilts from a commercial market hog producer, we see very little of that.
They're not looking to sneak one by anybody, and there are harsh punishment one's caught. So,
yes, ma'am.
Plus, it's just the wrong thing to do, and folks aren't looking.
Oh,
people who have dedicated their lives to feeding us are not looking to make us in jeopardy. So, yeah. So if it happens, it's a mistake, and it's
where the most instances of withdrawal problems are in cull animals, so something that has gotten sick, and they just messed up and they didn't adhere to the right withdrawal time. Sometimes we hate to admit this, but there's probably with fair animals, right? That sometimes we end up with some challenges like that, and there's going to be more instances sometimes with residues, sometimes with county fair animals. So.
And that's something we talk to the kids about, and the importance of it, because we're not there to win a blue ribbon. We're there to produce food for folks.
That's exactly right.
Animal project. So, yeah, super important.
Yes, ma'am.
So, well, that covers all of the questions that we had. Do you have any other pearls of wisdom you'd like to impart on folks who are interested in buying local meat or getting involved in the meat selling business? Or
yeah, I mean the thing I would say for those livestock producers who, this is what I would come back to. If you're a livestock producer, the selling some freezer beef, there's some opportunity with that. There really is. But to make that jump from being a livestock producer to a meat marketer, that's a pretty big jump. And I know there's a lot of excitement right now, and we've got big disconnects between, the price of live cattle, the 5 area weighted live price, and then what the cutout value is. There's a lot of disconnects with that. I understand that. And the idea that, the middleman's getting it. But, and right now, the Packers are making a lot of money right now. There's no question about that. There's a lot of challenge into doing this yourself. Not say it can't be done, because obviously there are people that are doing it. So just, and it will help you anyway. I work for the state, just like Miss Meg does, and we're here to help you.
And I think we can help you think through. We can't make that decision for you, but we can help you look at the facts and look at the numbers and make that decision and figure out if that's something that really works for your operation or not.
Yes, ma'am.
Make an educated decision. That's what we're here to do.
Exactly right.
That's great.
That's exactly